Our Lord says that I am the good shepherd. I know my flock and my flock know me. So Christ himself calls himself the good shepherd, to be the shepherd of the sheep. And he appointed apostles to also to be shepherds. And the apostles in turn appointed bishops, priests, and deacons. And each one of those offices, if we can call it that, is a part of being a shepherd. But not all bishops, priests, and deacons are good shepherds. This is a sad thing. We all struggle, we all have sins, but I mean, this is slightly different. And I'm going to refer to a book by Archbishop John Shakovskoy. He was OCA bishop in San Francisco. He was born in 1902 as Prince Dmitry Shakovskoy. When the revolution came, his parents and family left Russia and they went to France, and Bishop John grew up there. In fact, he became an established poet and essayist. That's somebody who writes commentaries on various things, usually on literature. And then in 1923, he went to the Holy Mountain, where he became a monk. He was tonsured on the Holy Mountain and is also ordained a hieromonk. Then he left the Holy Mountain, I don't have dates now. He went back to France, and then he served in various churches in Yugoslavia, France, and Germany. And it was in Germany that I came across him first time, not literally, physically, because he had moved to the States. But my spiritual mother in Berlin said that he was a very holy man, a great man of prayer. And this book, which I discovered, which you can all find and read, is very powerful. It's devotional, I would describe it. It's not just a commentary on how to be a good pastor, because that's what it's about. But it has a much deeper input to it. And he, I don't know what date it was, but when the Red Army was entering Berlin, at that time he'd been offered to be a dean of the St. Vladimir Seminary in New York. And so I don't blame him. He left before the soldiers got into the city and went to America. And shortly after that, he was made Bishop of Brooklyn, and then later Archbishop in San Francisco. His first chapter in the book actually is I wouldn't say it was negative, but it's interesting. It starts off with what he calls evil pastorship. Evil pastorship. In the Gospel, it talks about a hireling looking after the sheep, doesn't actually care, but, while he's got the job, he's doing the job. And then when a wolf comes, Volk, then he runs away, and the sheep are scattered. And so he's referring to that as a form of evil pastorship. And usually it's with people who become caught up in secular affairs. Christ is the chief shepherd, and I have my note here. He ordained apostles, bishops, priests, deacons, and subdeacons, and teachers, and laity. I want to expand on that because we are all shepherds in the sense that we are missionaries in the world. And as shepherds, we have to spread the faith. Now, how we do that, of course, we have to do that with humility and love. But we are responsible for those around us. This is very obvious or easy, I would say, in community because we know each other, we're a family. But to be in the workplace with people who are not orthodox or nothing actually, in this age in which we have all these psychological problems that people suffer from, a lack of purpose, this is the ideal time to be a shepherd, to be the support to somebody who is seeking. St. Paul says if you're asked about your faith, you have to answer. Now that doesn't mean argue about your faith. It means that you're responsible because they want to know what the hope that you have. St. Paul says you have hope. when people ask you, what is this hope in you, then you need to respond. So in that sense, we are all shepherds. Equally, we can be bad shepherds and cause scandals, imposing the faith, especially if we have a legalistic mind, or Archbishop John says a Judaic legalism. That means everything has to go by the book. Everything is in straight lines. I remember a story, well, it's true actually, but it's very difficult for a priest sometimes to do things. There are a lot of canons, and basically the canons should be interpreted by the bishops. Unfortunately, they get interpreted by priests, which is just unfortunate. And I came across a situation in which the priest used blessed oil and blessed it in the Latia again. And then somehow he found some obscure canon that would ban him from the priesthood for at least 100 years. I'm making it up, but... And in other words, this is a terrible... This is a shepherd of a flock, but he has a legalistic mind. What's he going to do to people that come to confession? If you open the book on canons, most of us, including me, would be banned from the priesthood and from communion for 50 years or something. Those canons can only be applied by the bishop, through the bishop. They're not a legalistic document. This is very important, and especially if you're a witness to your faith that people are not Orthodox. They want to know about, what do you believe and what do you do. You have to be very selective until you know a person can accept it, because if they're looking for some legal justification for the way they live and what they believe and what they think who God is, it's very dangerous. And also it puts us in a situation of being, overbearing. And this is a danger on the priesthood, is that the priest is not a secular authority. A priesthood is not authority, it is responsibility. So it's not a question, for a priest, it's not a question of authority, but the channels of grace. And this is what Bishop John emphasizes. The bishop is only a bishop as far as the grace flows through him. The same with the priest. Unfortunately, the channels of grace get blocked. They get blocked by secular concerns. And one of the chief things, I think, is worried about public opinion. Well, if I do this, what will people think? We have this pressure at the moment with this COVID thing. Do we accept what the authorities say? How much can we accept? And this is important because a priest has got to defend the faith and support the flock. And a priest cannot support the flock if he is driven by public opinion and by politics. There are even bishops who are involved in politics. I was shocked to see that here about 6 months ago. There's no place for politics in the priesthood. A bishop cannot be political. They may have political views, that's different, but certainly never to talk about it or to emphasize or bless political movements. And that, I'm afraid, has happened here. Pastorship is Christ's continuous life in the world. How does it affect you? I know it affects me. I'm a priest. How does it affect you? Christ's continuous work in the world. That's what you're doing. You're not selling a product. You're communicating the grace of God. You can only do that through purity, through humility, and through prayer. That is the only way. So you meet somebody, you pray for them. And sometimes it's best not to say anything, to be quiet. There's a very subtle, I think, balance between authority which is grace-given and authority which is based on your personal ego. And that's a big challenge for all priests. So the channels of grace, which determines whether you're a good shepherd, can be blocked by secular concerns and worries. In some cases, secular fear. There's fear because of this COVID. I'm talking about clergy, not just the people. So he also calls them false pastors. And a false pastor wrongly administers the word of truth. In the prayers and the liturgy, we pray that our bishop will administer the word of truth. This is from the apostles. And there are some who wrongly administer the word of truth. And he says, wolves have entered the shepherd's flock, having established themselves in churches and nations. Right from the very beginning of our church, or the beginning of the church, there have always been some opposition. We had the heresies of Gnosticism. Of course, Gnosticism hasn't gone away. It reappears in different forms. New Age, hippie movement, progressive Orthodox. There's a whole list of things. This is Gnosticism. And it was there in the beginning of the church, and I think it will be there definitely until the end. And false pastors, he says, do their own will. It is necessary to struggle against them by power and action. Prayer and action. This is how we struggle against the heresy. If we're leading a proper life, then we will recognize that certain things are not correct. And we have to protect and guard the faith. And he's saying here, I'm quoting Bishop John, all right, Shagovskoy, and it's not my opinion necessarily. He quotes St. John Chrysostom, who says, "There is no one whom I fear more than the bishops, with the exception of a few." Now he's writing that in the 4th century. So the problems haven't gone away. It's very difficult. A young man goes through seminary and then he gets his, whatever it is, degree in theology. Is he ready to become a priest? The answer is no. No. It is a calling from God. And it is, one has to really think about that, to take on the responsibility. Become a priest because you need a job? That's another false pastorship. Okay, that's all the negative side of it. Now let's look at the positive side. So chapter 2, we begin to ease out a little bit. It's a shock. It's a shock to read it. This is to do with the grace of the priesthood. And this is very important for all of us to understand, that every sacred rite is a great spiritual reality. Every sacred rite is a great spiritual reality, an embodiment of the Holy Spirit. What that means is if a priest gives a blessing, it has power. It isn't just like shaking hands. It has power. If you ask for a blessing, then you're covered by grace. This is wonderful. So it's very important to take a blessing to do something. That's very dangerous, obviously, in a priest that wants power and is inexperienced, because he thinks that nobody can do anything without his blessing, which is not the same thing at all. All right? It's a relationship of love and humility on both sides of the equation, from the priest and the person asking for the blessing, because every blessing has the power of the Holy Spirit, and so it can't be done lightly. Even blessing food. I have an example of this which I read about. I think it was 19th century Russia, where this woman wanted to get rid of her husband, so she put poison in the soup and sat down at the table to eat. And of course she didn't eat, she just watched him eating. Well, he didn't actually eat. He waited for a while, and the knock on the door, and there was the priest, the parish priest. "Oh, Father, come in. We're having wonderful soup. You come and join us. Would you please bless it?" So he blessed this poisonous soup, and they sat down and they ate. The wife disappeared quickly into the kitchen, trembling, but nobody was poisoned. Power of blessing. Even poison can be changed. Very important actually, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to priests, because it's powerful. We can't do anything that's sort of flippant. Everything, every blessing, every move is a part of the priesthood, a part of grace. And bishops and deacons are included, not in giving blessings, but in the same behavior and understanding that they carry grace, which is transmitted to you, and which you transmit to other people, especially those who are seeking the church, seeking Christ. Bishop John says that false prayer, and what he means by that, he means that prayer that's said without any thinking. Now this is very difficult for a priest, because if you've been doing it a long time, things become automatic. You know that in life, if you do something, you practice something, you don't have to look it up every time, you know it. Well, this is dangerous. If you want to be prayer, you have to pray. And priests have to learn how to pray in the liturgy, because there's so much to read. And the biggest fear that I have is autopilot. Because you know it by heart, and this is why a priest has a book. And the book shows that this is his preaching, he's praying from according to the rubrics of the church and not from his own personal, except that his personal prayer has to be in it through those words. But it's very difficult to go on. If you go onto autopilot, and suddenly you don't really realize what you said. I'm afflicted by it, not very often, fortunately, but sometimes I think, did I say that? Well, I must have done, because the choir's singing, so I did, didn't I? Eh? Probably. No, but everything has to be, it has to be proper prayer. So how do you say your communion prayers? 10 prayers. Every priest must say all those prayers. I can't, because I can't do them. I can read the prayers, and then I can tick off the list that I did them. Yeah? So now I'm ready. No, of course not. And I would recommend on a practical level that you in the communion prayers, you read some prayers that you like, that actually speak to you, and use those, and maybe add some more later. But if you do all those prayers, and the akathist that goes before it, or the canon for communion, I don't think you're praying. You're reciting. Now, God covers us. So intention, namarenia, is important, that we want to do what is right. Okay, but we never do. But as long as we realize that, I think that starts leading towards humility. I'm not quite sure, but I think it does. Okay, I do what I can do. And in the liturgy, you begin to wander off, even if you're on the clear or singing. You can sing because you know it so well, and you don't even know what you sung. Okay, this is a struggle. We're all guilty of that, and we all have to struggle, and as long as we are aware of it, then God is able to work through this muddle that we create. But when we don't care and just do it, now coming back to clergy again, they're so familiar. I remember asking for a blessing from a priest many years ago, and he was embarrassed because he didn't know where to put his cigarette. Well, that's sad. And also another one said, I don't give blessings. Now I like that one, because I can challenge that person. What do you mean, I don't like giving blessings? Well, who are you? Are you God? What do you mean you don't like giving blessings? Nothing to do with you. You're a priest. You have to pass on the blessing. I don't give blessings. Very sad. Very sad. There are no figurative rites, only grace-filled realities of the divine kingdom. So everything has power. It isn't just, give me a quick blessing to do something, or cross yourself quickly or something. No, everything. The sign of the cross has power. We don't do this, or we shouldn't. People do. It's all, it's all the time we have to have our attention, because we all slip into lazy mode, I would call that. There are no figurative rites, only grace-filled realities of the divine kingdom, blessing of food, and servants of the altar. If you serve in the altar, that is awesome, and it's difficult to concentrate, but you have to, because what you're in there is a service to Christ. It's very important. And obviously, we have to have decorum. Bishop John talks about where a Russian emigrant church, I don't know where, I would say France, but I don't know. And he said that somebody came early to church and the door was open into the altar, the south door, and the priest was in there having a conversation with somebody, secular conversation, while vesting. And they were obviously scandalized by that. And so was Bishop John. I think he had to reprimand this person afterwards. Actually, the same priest, you could tell the way he served that he'd been drinking. So he had a problem. And anyway, Bishop John managed to sort it out. I'm sure he did in a nice sort of way. But it's when I go into the altar, I think of this because the prayers for vesting are beautiful. They are fantastic. First prayer is I put on the stikha, my white stikha, and I say, "My soul rejoices in the Lord, for he has clothed me with the garment of salvation." Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? You've dressed me with a garment of salvation. As a bride, I've forgotten the word now, sorry, it's going out of my mind, but see, I'm on automatic, that's why. And then other prayers, you're putting on the phelon, putting on epitrachelion. It says, "Blessed be God who pours his grace upon his priests, like Aaron, upon the head of Aaron, the chief priest, which flowed down his beard into the outer skirts of his garments." That's amazing stuff, isn't it? I'm saying stuff, but really, I'm bowled over by that every time I do those prayers and putting on the cuffs. "Thy right hand, O Lord, is glorified in strength." These are beautiful prayers. How can you say that and have a conversation about the latest soccer match? Or whatever is in your mind at the time, yeah? The altar is a sacred place. It's sacred, it's holy, it is the Holy of Holies. And we don't talk in there unless we have to. We certainly don't have conversations. And that's important. Is it because, oh yes, there was a saying that the new priest, for the first 3 years of serving, fears God. Then after that, God fears the priest. I was told that at my ordination. Well, we're human and we're sinners. And the servers are not simply, and readers are not simply taper bearers. They're not just there to carry candle. They're a part of the service, they're part of the ministry. They are shepherds. Every Christian is a teacher, must be ready to give an answer to every man who asks why you have such hope. And Bishop John says, "Acts of faith always teach, even if the agent remains silent." So there is a silent witness, which is what we carry out in the world. This is what we carry out when we're at the checkout. You can say things that really might startle the cashier, but I'll leave that up to you, what you say. How are you, God willing? I've never heard that before, Or happy holidays, I like that one, for which I apply whatever it may be correctly. But they know me now, so it's not going to have any effect. Give an answer to every man who asks you why you have such hope. Another, I've got a note here, it says fear of asceticism. Bishop John talks about that when somebody's coming into the church, you have to bring them in gently. Gently. It's like feeding a wild bird. If you want to feed a wild bird, you know what to do. Take a little crumb and you flick it, keep still. You don't take a loaf of bread and throw it at the, whatever it is, junko. I don't like that. You have to be gentle. And it comes, when people say to me, well, I want to become Orthodox, now what do I have to study? And I hear that you have to do several years studying. And I say, well, I don't know about that, but I think you should become Orthodox and then you'll start learning what it's all about. You have to learn it from the inside. Now, you can't be flippant and say it doesn't matter, you don't have to know anything. No, there's some basic things, but then you have a sponsor, don't you? And the sponsor is there to teach you on the small things like having a book for Pamiętnik, as if you have it in your tradition. The Greeks don't. And prosper. We have individual prosperers. That's a Russian practice. Nobody else does that. I use I don't use 5, I use 2 large loaves. In the Serbian and Greek practice, it's 1 big loaf. Different practice. But whichever church you're in, you need to know these things because this is how you behave, And you learn by it. Sometimes you can learn by watching other people, but it's not always very reliable, especially if they don't know what they're doing, but that happens. Every Christian is a teacher. A fear of asceticism. Sorry, I'll come back to that. We fast 4 times a year. People are not used to that. Actually, having said that, of course, in today's world, everybody's fasting for health reasons. There's a lot of fasting. And so, if you say to your doctor, well, how do you fast? And yes, I fast 4 times a year. Wow. Well, somebody said to me the other day, you're going to live forever on an Orthodox fast. I don't know, somebody told me that recently. There is a fear of asceticism because one's worried, all right, about not getting enough food or whatever it is. And we have to learn to do that gently. We mustn't push people into some of things like that. Extremism, Judaic legalism. We have to avoid that. I think that's what he was talking about. Liberation from the flesh, modest use of earthly goods. And he talks about fasting. He gives a second example of fasting. A singer that he knew fasted for 6 hours before, he doesn't say he or she, whoever it was, performed. In order to perform well, probably an opera, they had to fast before the performance. An athlete doesn't have a huge dinner and then go and do whatever they do, athletics. So this is all a part of our spiritual life. It's that we have to do it by degrees, but there has to be some modesty. So if you're teaching somebody, inviting somebody into the church, you can't throw the book at them about fasting. You have to do it subtly, and they get sort of rather surprised. You mean there's another fast? I have to fast on Wednesdays. Oh, I don't know anybody who does that. Well, we do. So if that's what if you're serious, that's what you would do. St. Seraphim says that those who do not fast on Wednesdays and Fridays cannot call themselves Christians. Cannot call themselves Christians if they don't keep the Wednesday and Friday fasts. And I think we all have a little fear of asceticism, I think, if we're honest with ourselves. We are always, but we are not negative, we are always awaiting providence. That's exciting. What's going to happen tomorrow? We know what's going to happen tomorrow, for the end of the world here, but what I mean is that it's providential, okay? Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do next week. Well, obviously you have a job, you have to plan. I'm not talking about secular activities, I'm talking about spiritual. We don't know. And we live every day, and we don't live tomorrow, and we don't live yesterday because it's gone. But we live in always awaiting providence. Now to close, an evil pastor is a hireling, following worldly trends and opinions. Worldly trends and opinions. And a good pastor, I want to give you an example, actually a wonderful story. I'll finish up on the story. Metropolitan Anthony Soros, who was bishop in London, one of his visits to the Soviet Union, was introduced to an old priest who'd been in the labour camps for 36 years. And he saw, the bishop noticed this priest was serving, and he had a really happy face and relaxed, beautiful face, happy. And so he said, "But who is this?" And he said, "Oh yes, he's the one that came from the camps." So Bishop Anthony went up to him and said, "Can you tell me something, what is your experience?" He said, "It's fantastic, wonderful," he said. "I was a young priest, and there weren't any experienced priests or educated priests in the camps, and I was the only one. So God chose me to be a shepherd in this situation, in the lager." And he was so pleased to have been imprisoned for 36 years in a labour camp. And if you know anything about labour camps in Russia or Romania, that's another terrible experience, then you know that this is amazing, isn't it? The grace of God. New priest, locked up. The Lord makes his ministers a flaming fire.